Life as a medieval jester was not all laughter and fun. Beneath the humor lay a demanding profession that very few would choose willingly. They had to be quick-witted, agile, and careful with every word they spoke. If you assume their only role was making people laugh, think again. Kings and nobles did not hire anyone who could produce silly noises. If that were the case, most teenage boys in the kingdom would have held a court position. They sought individuals clever enough to read a room faster than a soldier could draw a sword. A poorly timed joke could turn a friendly banquet into a diplomatic incident. The process of becoming a court jester was nothing like modern job applications. Singing was essential. Not just casual humming, but performing ballads and creating lyrics spontaneously. Juggling skills were almost mandatory. Storytelling abilities were closely evaluated because jesters might be required to entertain guests for hours during long winter nights. Mimicry was one of the most dangerous yet prized skills. Some jesters could imitate noblemen so convincingly that guards would confuse the real nobles with the performer. Not everyone chose the role of jester. Many ended up in the profession by circumstance. Historical records indicate that roughly 1 in 4 jesters began life as peasants noticed by a noble. Others were captured during conflicts and presented as gifts to courts. A living present adorned in bells and bright clothing. One grim aspect of jester history involved exploiting people with unusual physical traits or disabilities. Individuals with distinctive appearances were sometimes forced into service against their will. Courts across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East documented this cruel practice. The fortunate ones were those who had formal training. These trained entertainers traveled between courts with ready performances. They were medieval comedians, but with far higher stakes. Failure to amuse could result in imprisonment rather than being booed from a stage. Employment did not guarantee comfort. Jesters were the kingdom's walking entertainment and verbal punching bags. Being summoned at 3 in the morning because the king suffered a nightmare requiring amusement was part of the position. Jesters had to grasp the intricate politics of court life. Records show the average tenure lasted about 4 years before dismissal, fleeing, or an untimely end. For successful jesters, rewards went beyond mere survival. A timely, clever joke could earn significant benefits. Being allowed to mock the king without punishment meant that pay needed to be worthwhile. Success in court could mean material advantages beyond mere wages. Once hired, the jester's wardrobe transformed. Brightly colored mismatched clothing, pointed shoes, and a hat jingling with bells became standard. Their new employer could imprison them on a whim, yet compensation existed. Some courtiers had comparatively good arrangements. They received regular wages, meals from royal kitchens, a sheltered place to sleep, and clothing, although often flamboyantly patterned. A typical jester outfit would not impress a romantic partner unless they admired jingling bells and clashing colors. Historical records from medieval Europe indicate that well-established jesters could earn similar wages to mid-level craftsmen. In 14th century England, royal ledgers list jesters earning between 10 and 20 pounds annually, while common laborers earned around 2 pounds. The real advantage was bonuses. Favored jesters could receive substantial perks. One English jester was granted land for lifting the king's spirits during a political crisis. The grant specified it was for services of amusement and sound advice. Another court fool received an unusual reward. A German record shows a jester receiving a gallon of beer daily for life, totaling 365 gallons each year. This ensured his jokes became increasingly lively as the evening progressed, at least in his mind. Royal gifts could also include jewelry, gold coins, or livestock. Such rewards depended on a king's favor. Failure could mean imprisonment or even execution. Compensation varied widely. A jester in a wealthy kingdom might earn more than minor nobles, while another in a smaller household might receive only scraps and a straw-filled bed near the horses. Some jesters realized that sleeping near horses meant they were not the smelliest person in the castle. Minor comforts mattered at the bottom of the hierarchy. Most could not save enough to retire comfortably. Jesters remained dependent on their patrons until they could no longer perform. Financial security required careful saving, exceptional humor, or extraordinary luck. For all their wit and political acumen, jesters had to do more than entertain to earn a living. Their role extended far beyond comedy. What did a medieval jester actually do each day? The answer is much more complex than cracking jokes. They were the Swiss Army knife of entertainment. Multiple skills were essential to survive each week. Jesters needed to master several performing arts. Singing ballads, playing instruments from drums to lutes, and performing intricate dances that told stories or satirized current events were all expected of them. One English court record recounts a jester who danced with such wild energy that it seemed as if 20 spirits controlled his movements, each more cheerful than the last. Tumbling and acrobatic feats were particularly popular with audiences. Many jesters could execute backflips, handstands, and splits, skills that became even more impressive after guests had consumed several rounds of ale during a feast. The most skilled jesters developed signature routines requested by the court. Animal impersonations were surprisingly common in job expectations. French court records describe a jester capable of mimicking 14 different animals, from rooster calls to wolf howls. His imitation of a bear was so realistic that hunting dogs would bark in alarm whenever he performed it. Puppetry and sound effects were also crucial skills for jesters. Small puppet shows allowed them to tell stories too sensitive or politically risky to act out personally. Some performers became famous for recreating the sounds of battles, storms, or even the Queen's snoring. The last example could result in a night spent in the dungeon if Her Majesty found it offensive. Entertainment alone, however, was only one aspect of the position. Court jesters also functioned as message carriers among nobles, especially when messages needed careful handling. Bad news became easier to deliver when wrapped in a song or a humorous tale. Jesters often announced tax increases, military setbacks, or diplomatic insults because the messenger was safer if people were laughing. Perhaps the most demanding part of the role was serving as the emotional outlet for nobility. When kings or lords were frustrated, bored, or angry, they summoned jesters to distract them. These situations were akin to defusing a bomb while performing songs and acrobatics. One misstep could have disastrous consequences. Jesters frequently became scapegoats. If a nobleman spilled his drink, it might be blamed on the jester. If a lady fell, it could be assumed the jester's antics caused her to lose balance. This system allowed nobles to avoid personal embarrassment. The best jesters transformed this challenging role into one of unusual influence. They became trusted companions capable of speaking truths others could not. They reminded kings of their humanity and helped ease tensions during heated moments. A jester able to make an enraged king laugh could prevent rash decisions leading to violence. This combination of entertainer and advisor created a peculiar respect. While openly mocked for appearance and behavior, accomplished jesters were secretly valued for insight and intelligence. Perhaps their most dangerous and valuable skill was the ability to speak truth to power. Here is a surprising aspect of medieval courts. While most people would be executed for insulting the king, jesters could openly mock him and sometimes receive rewards. This was intentional and part of the job description. Medieval kings were not known for tolerating criticism, yet jesters could point out mistakes, ridicule appearance, or question decisions as long as it elicited laughter. This freedom of speech came with strict, unspoken rules. The jester had to be strategic in delivery. Criticism disguised in a humorous tale worked perfectly. A biting joke ending in flattery was even better. A direct insult without humor could send even a jester to a dungeon or worse. Royal records across Europe illustrate this delicate balance. In England, one jester became famous for an annual performance mocking the king's financial policies. On a particular holiday each year, he danced, recited rhymes about excessive taxes, and concluded with a precise, humorous release of gas. This act earned him land and gold. In the French court, records describe a jester attending a royal meeting wearing a straw crown. When the king asked why, he replied, "Practicing to be you, your majesty. You have acted so foolishly that soon we may need to trade hats." Instead of punishing him, the king laughed and reconsidered his choices. These performances were not mere amusement. They served a crucial purpose in governance. Kings were surrounded by people who told them only what they wanted to hear. In this context, the jester was the only source of reliable feedback. Some rulers relied on jesters for this reason. Being the only person able to ridicule the king without consequence required skill and timing. Memoirs from royal advisors note, consulting the jester before delivering bad news, seeking advice on the safest approach. Yet this freedom carried risks. Numerous accounts tell of jesters who overstepped, misread the mood, or encountered a king on a bad day. Learning jokes was easy. Knowing when to stop was essential for survival. Documents from various courts describe punishments for jesters whose humor crossed the line, ranging from beatings to imprisonment. Some vanished from records after bold acts, their fates unrecorded but predictable. The most successful jesters developed an almost supernatural talent for reading moods and subtle signals. The life of a medieval jester was far from just jokes and laughter. Beneath the humor lay a demanding job that few would willingly choose. They needed intelligence, speed, and care in every word they spoke. If you assume jesters spent their days simply making people laugh, you would be mistaken. Kings and nobles did not employ anyone who could produce silly sounds. If that were true, most teenage boys in the kingdom would have found work at court. Courts wanted entertainers capable of reading a room faster than a soldier could draw a sword. A poorly timed joke could turn a friendly feast into conflict between factions. The process of becoming a jester was nothing like today's job applications. Singing was essential. Not simple humming, but ballads with lyrics created on the spot. Juggling was practically required, and storytelling skills were closely examined, since a jester might need to entertain for hours during long winter evenings. Mimicry was perhaps the most risky yet valuable skill. Some jesters imitated nobles so accurately that guards sometimes mistook real courtiers for performances. Not all jesters chose this path. Many were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Historical records indicate around 1 in 4 began as peasants who caught the attention of a noble. Others were captured in wars and presented to courts as human gifts adorned with bells and bright clothing. A darker side of jester history was the exploitation of those with unusual physical traits or disabilities. Some individuals were forced into the role. Courts across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East documented this practice. The fortunate had formal training, traveling between courts with prepared routines. These performers were medieval comedians under constant pressure, since failure could mean imprisonment or worse. Employment did not guarantee comfort. Jesters became walking entertainment systems and verbal punching bags. Being awakened at 3 in the morning to cheer a king from a nightmare was part of the job. They needed to constantly navigate court politics. Records suggest the average jester lasted about 4 years before being dismissed, fleeing, or meeting misfortune. Those who thrived could gain rewards beyond survival. A well-timed joke could earn perks. Being allowed to mock the king without penalty meant a jester had to ensure the pay was worth the risk. Upon joining a royal court, one's wardrobe became mismatched bright clothing with a bell-tipped hat, and the boss could punish at whim. Some court jesters lived relatively well. They received regular wages, meals prepared by royal cooks, a dry place to sleep, and colorful clothing. The typical outfit was flamboyant and impractical. Medieval European records show well-established jesters earned roughly the same as mid-level craftsmen. In 14th century England, several jesters earned 10 to 20 pounds annually, while ordinary laborers earned only 2. The greatest wealth came from bonuses. A favored jester might receive land for amusing a king during a political crisis. One English record specified a land grant awarded for laughter and wise counsel. Another account from Germany shows a jester paid with 1 gallon of beer per day for life, ensuring merrier performances. Royal gifts sometimes included gold, jewelry, or livestock. These rewards depended on the king's favor. Poor performances could lead to a dungeon or worse. Pay varied widely. Wealthy courts offered more than minor noble households, which might only provide scraps and a hard bed near the horses. Sleeping near animals offered minor advantages. Small comforts mattered for those at the bottom of the social ladder. Most jesters could not retire with savings, remaining reliant on their patron until performance was no longer possible. Wealthy retirement required careful saving, wit, longevity, or luck. Jesters' work extended far beyond comedy. Court entertainers functioned as versatile performers, needing multiple skills to survive. They had to sing ballads, play instruments from simple drums to intricate lutes, and perform elaborate dances that conveyed stories or satirized events. Winter journeys meant frostbite. Summer brought the risk of heat stroke. Despite these dangers, or perhaps because of them, humor about illness, death, and bodily functions was very popular in medieval society. Dark comedy helped people cope with constant exposure to sickness and mortality. Jokes about excrement were not just for children. They were considered high humor when everyone regularly witnessed the horrors of dysentery and other diseases. Jesters who could find laughter in grim realities became especially valued. One thing that endured in memory was who could make people laugh when everything else seemed to fall apart. Records show that during major plague outbreaks, rulers kept jesters nearby, not only for entertainment, but for emotional comfort. A performer who could joke while the world seemed to collapse earned a rare kind of respect. In a world where sickness was constant, a jester's role was to lighten suffering, even when it threatened their own life. All performances eventually end. For medieval jesters, aging brought a harsh reality. Retirement homes for court entertainers did not exist. Once knees stiffened too much for acrobatics, or voices became too rough for singing, professional foolishness came to an end. Documents from the 1400s reveal that more than 2/3 of court jesters disappeared from castle payment records after reaching their 40s, an age considered elderly in the medieval period. Unlike craftsmen who could teach apprentices or farmers who could switch to lighter labor, aging jesters had few alternatives. Their value depended on quick thinking and physical skill, both of which declined over time. A fortunate few remained in castles in less demanding roles. Court records mention former jesters becoming storytellers for noble children when tumbling was no longer possible. Others preserved entertainment traditions, teaching younger performers the songs and jokes that pleased earlier rulers. Some saved enough coins to open taverns, where patrons paid for drinks regardless of laughter. Religious institutions occasionally offered refuge to former entertainers, especially those with experience in church plays or literacy skills. The transition from bawdy jokes to copying sacred texts marked a dramatic career change. One monastery record tells of a retired jester who could not resist drawing humorous faces in the margins of holy books. For those without savings or noble support, choices were grim. Some joined traveling performers as costume makers. Others became beggars, using humor to collect coins. Some survived as village-wise fools, eccentric individuals relying on community generosity, while occasionally entertaining and offering odd counsel. Castle account books rarely recorded payments to retired jesters. King Henry of England gave yearly funds to an elderly court fool. £6 enough for basic food and shelter, but little else. Such generosity was exceptional. Most rulers simply replaced aging entertainers with younger, livelier talent. Decades of making nobles laugh at growing old ultimately made the joke a personal story. Even famous jesters were quickly forgotten. Their role was to create memorable moments, yet history preserved few of their achievements. More is known about ordinary servants than those who entertained rulers during wars and crises. The final years of most jesters were unremarkable. No special graves marked their passing. No songs remembered them. The court moved on with a new entertainer. A new ruler wanted a different fool with original material. Yesterday's celebrated performer might end up begging at the castle gate. A sudden fall from a position of attention and respect. A jester's career began with laughter, but often ended in silence, showing that medieval performance was one of history's most difficult and thankless professions.